Welcome back to A to Z here on Locked On Sports Atlanta, free on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Search Locked On Sports Atlanta as we continue to get through the Atlanta Falcon schedule. And joining me now, he's a good friend. There's a lot of things he is. He's an accomplished professional. He was a great quarterback in college, and he's one hell of a good guy. He's Hutson Mason, and he joins us here on A to Z. What's up, buddy? Good to see you, man.
Man, you don't talk to me that nicely in person when we're actually
No,
together.
I don't. Well, I want people who watch and listen to this show to think that I bring high level people on.
Okay.
If when you and I hang out and we make fun of each other for 3 hours, while it might be funny for everybody, it doesn't necessarily make for good content here when the
Yeah,
Falcon schedule has been released.
I appreciate it. It made me feel good about myself for a second.
Well, listen, I cannot deny your attributes. You're very good looking. You threw a hell of a football back in the day. You probably still throw a good one now, at least better than Marcus Mariota might, for that matter. But that's a whole different conversation for a different day. All right, Falcon schedule's released, and you know my rule, hard fast. I'm not sitting here predicting wins because it's stupid. It's a waste
Yeah.
of time. I have no idea what the schedule is going to look. I mean, what the roster is going to look like on September 11th, let alone November 27th when they play Washington. So we can forget all that. But I will say this much. The Falcons' opening season schedule, the first 7 weeks, that is a meat grinder, man. I mean, you get your division rival, even though they're at home week one. You play the defending Super Bowl champs in week two. You play one of the most talented rosters in the Browns in week four. You travel to Tampa Bay in week five. You get the 49ers in the NFC Championship game in week six, and then the defending AFC champs on the road in week seven.
Yeah.
Yuck, Hudson. Yuck.
Yeah, not ideal. I mean, so here's some of my immediate takeaways. Obviously opening up the season with the Saints, opening up the season with a division opponent, in my opinion, is never ideal, let alone it being the Saints because of the emotional aspect tied to that rivalry. And then you mentioned it, Rams, Seahawks, Browns, Bucs. I mean, to me, Mark, if the Falcons don't win at the Seahawks, you could easily be looking at an 0-5 start, maybe even more than that, 0-6 start. So obviously the two West Coast road trips, that's a lot of travel. But for me, the first thing that I look at in the NFL when it comes to a day like this in the schedule and projecting wins and losses, not that I'm going to do that. My point is that I think the quarterbacks that you play is the number one factor that affects wins and losses, even more so than whether you're playing at home or on the road. I would put home and away number two in terms of the most crucial factor that affects wins and losses in the NFL. Number one for me is opposing quarterbacks. Last year, the Falcons had a cakewalk for opposing quarterbacks, and they still were only able to squeeze out 7 wins. So you look at this list from top to bottom, it's going to be a much more competitive and much more of a gauntlet when it comes to Stafford. Maybe you bypass Deshaun Watson depending on his suspension and how long it is, because you get him in week 4. And hopefully for Falcons' sakes, he's serving a 6-game or 8-game suspension. But, don't laugh at Jimmy Garoppolo. The guy's a winner. Then you get to see, a great young quarterback in Joe Burrow with the Bengals. Another great young quarterback on the West Coast with the Chargers. And then at the end of the year, you still got to see Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, and then Tom Brady, of course, twice. So the quality of quarterbacks is the scheduling gods were not shining down on the Falcons when they were thinking about what quarterbacks they had to play this year.
Yeah. Speaking of quarterbacks, and let's dive into this as your forte here. And I tweeted this out last night about, the most opportune time to get Desmond Ritter into a starting role would be the week after the Thursday night game, because you got a longer week, or right after the bye week. Now, the Falcons don't get the Thursday night game to week 10, meaning he wouldn't start to week 11, and the bye week is in week 14. That's just not really enough time, in my opinion, to evaluate Desmond Ritter to play enough games to really get a sense of what he is. So when I look at the schedule, I think the most opportune time, and let's just assume for argument's sake, Mariota is playing average. He's not playing great. He's not playing, but obviously given the first 7 games of the season, as you talked about, without predicting wins and losses, if I told you they were going to be 2-5, would you be surprised? Probably not.
Yeah.
That's where it is. So But then you get to the Carolina Panthers on October 30th in week 8. They are at home against that game. Then they have another home game against the Chargers, will be tough. Then they get the Thursday night game at Carolina. So he sees Carolina twice in a 3-week span before having more time to prep to come home for the Bears again. I think week 8 against Carolina is probably the best chance for him to take the starting role. And what I think is super important is that he plays the same opponent 10 days later. And you can really gauge what he learned in week 1, though the first time around against the Panthers, to the second time. And I think that will tell you a lot about where he is. So my guess, just spitballing, as far as the best opportune time to do it, week 8 against the Cardinals, week 8 against the Carolina Panthers, and because you see them again 2 weeks or 10 days later on Thursday night.
Yeah, I mean it's a really good point. And the other thing that sticks out to me about that week 8, week 9, week 10 is you get the Panthers and Chargers at home. So, you're not asking your young quarterback hypothetically and Desmond Ritter to have to go play on the road in a tough place, let alone if that game was in LA, deal with travel. It would be only his second start, So, yeah, I could absolutely see how if you were looking to kind of pinpoint on the schedule, where does it make sense for Desmond Ritter? Yeah, I personally, if you're making me give you a prediction, I think it even comes even earlier than week 8, just because this schedule is so tough out the gate, and you draft a quarterback 3rd round. What are the expectations for him? Is it hey, he's got to play by week 8, he's got to play? For me, it's not necessarily so much about where you drafted Desmond Ritter as much as it is we need to figure out what we got in him, and we need to figure out what we're doing next year. And so to me, it's irrelevant that he's a 3rd round draft pick because we all know Marcus Mariota is not the long-term answer. So again, I go back to, I think if they don't beat Seattle September 25th on the road, you are legitimately looking at a 0-5, maybe an 0-6 start, depending on who starts for the 49ers at quarterback. And at that point, if you're 1-5, 0-6, the season's over. And
you're making a quarterback change regardless.
Yeah, you make a quarterback change regardless, maybe right there at the 49ers or Bengals middle of October.
Here's the other thing I would say about, look, October's going to suck, right? The Browns, the Buccaneers, the 49ers, the Bengals. Like, forget about everything aside. Those are 4 legit defenses across the board that you're going to be facing in 2 tough road games in Tampa Bay and Cincinnati. Like, I don't want to put him there because I want to put him against a defense that I have a shot against. And the Panthers defense the past couple of years has been bad. And at least he has a chance to develop some confidence against Carolina. I wouldn't throw him in there against San Fran. I certainly wouldn't do it against Tampa Bay in playing Tom Brady. That's not where you want your rookie to make his first start against Tom Brady. Because he was in diapers when Tom Brady was winning his first Super Bowl. So all that aside, I just don't see an opportune time. And maybe it does work out that way. Maybe if they are 2-5 or 1-6 or whatever it may be, by the time they get to week 8 with Carolina, it's time to make that transition anyway. That's about the best that I can come up with. Waiting until week 14 or week 15, when the final 4 games are Saints, at Ravens, Cardinals, and Buccaneers, what are you really gauging about Desmond Ritter in those 4 games if you wait till the bye week?
Yeah, I think, too, the risk of waiting too long to play Desmond Ritter in the year is that when your season's over halfway through the year, guys are struggling to figure out what to play for, right? And so you want to put Desmond Ritter in a situation where the guys around him are still highly competitive. They're still highly motivated. And you want to see, okay, how does this guy thrive, work in a system with the first stringers around him, healthy first stringers around him, not a bunch of, backups late in the year because your veteran guys may be sitting. They're worried about getting hurt, that type of thing. So I think that, and, Marcus Mariota has very, very seldomly made it through an entire season healthy. So based on his track record, I mean, there's a good chance that Desmond Ritter is going to play at some point because Marcus Mariota has just had a really difficult time staying healthy.
Yeah, and to that point, Hutson, I mean, you went through an NFL camp and you know what it's like. How much is that prep time, extra prep time, crucial, especially for a young QB?
Yeah, it's huge. Very random. Very rarely do you see quarterbacks just ready, and I'm talking about, how many quarterbacks do this exercise in your mind? Can you remember that were just day one starters in the NFL? Right, Andrew Luck comes to mind. Peyton Manning comes. Matt Ryan. Yeah, Matt Ryan was. It's very rare. I think a lot of it has to do with what type of system that you played in college. I can't really speak much about the system that Desmond Ritter played in at Cincinnati. I'll be honest with you. I don't know a whole lot about it. It's not like it's some system that is really well known for putting quarterbacks in the NFL. So there's always a learning curve and a speed curve, but a lot of it will have to do with who Desmond Ritter is, how hungry he is, how ready he is to learn. And I just very rarely see guys, even with the intangibles. Stafford was an example, but he was a number one overall pick. It's going to take a couple weeks during the regular season for him to sit and learn, get comfortable with how to prepare. And even halfway through the year, you may not be ready. But at some point, you just got to kind of throw the kid in the fire, especially if you're a team that's already halfway out or, halfway done through the season and you're 1-8 or whatever it is. I mean, look at Herbert and his situation when Tyrod, he wasn't really penciled in as the guy. It took Tyrod Taylor getting stabbed in the neck accidentally by his team doctor. But they didn't really, it's not like they sat there and they were like,
okay, so I'll use a similar example, like Joe Flacco in Baltimore when I covered him. When he was drafted, and he was drafted in the first round, they never intended for him to be the starter. Kyle Bola got hurt, and I forget who the other backup was. He was ill. He got sick, and Flacco had to start week one, and it ended up working out. I mean, even Ben Roethlisberger, he played in week one his rookie year because Tommy Maddox got leveled and got injured. He had to come in, and then it just took off, right? Like, that's usually the cases where you see those guys from day one or the first time they get in there end up working. It's due to injury or it's due to extenuating circumstances like that. But like you said, there are very few quarterbacks nowadays. Well, years ago, we were anointed from day one. Even Baker Mayfield was a number one overall pick, right? I mean, he was who was he sitting behind that stunk? I forget, but he didn't end up starting until like week 5 or week 6.
And most of these guys that do start day one are first round or if not number one overall picks. And they're number one for a reason, because they are just very, very gifted in terms of throwing the football and all the other attributes that it takes to be successful at that level. We're talking about a third round pick, right? When you're a third round pick in the NFL, there's a reason why you're a third round pick. I think Desmond Ritter got drafted where he should have got drafted. I don't think he fell. I don't really think he was overdrafted. I think that's exactly what he is a third round pick, a little bit of a project, needs to develop, learn an NFL system, not really ready to play immediately, not going to blow you away with arm talent or, a certain skill set. But, Russell Wilson, middle round draft pick, a guy came in, super motivated, hungry, ended up pretty much being a starter early on. Dak Prescott, there's an example. But again, that was because of injury to Tony Romo in a preseason game. So circumstances will dictate this. I think if I'm predicting how the Falcons season's going to go, it's not going to go very well. We'll see Desmond Ritter by the middle of the season.
One more for you here. And let's just make this a realistic possibility, since there isn't a very opportune time to sort of slide him in to get a start. Should Desmond Ritter come into training camp in an open quarterback competition? And if he wins it, should he start week 1?
Should he come in an open quarterback competition? I don't think so. I don't think you necessarily. It's not. Maybe pressure is the right word. I just think.
I mean, in fairness, again, you brought up Russell Wilson, right? He didn't go into his camp in an open quarterback competition, but they saw he was much better than Matt Flynn, and he ended up winning the starting job and started from day one and never really looked back. I'm not saying that same thing would materialize, and I want to get away from the Russell Wilson third round references because it's just stupid. They're completely different players. They went to completely different schools, did completely different things. But the point is simply that, if he comes into camp in an open competition, which I think he should, I don't think Arthur Smith is wrong for doing that. Along the same way we saw with Justin Fields, remember Matt Nagy about halfway through camp, or 2 weeks into camp, they anointed Mitch Trubisky the starter. Why? Because they saw he couldn't play. They saw Justin Fields wasn't ready, and they knew he wasn't ready. And that was
Yeah.
the only reason to anoint Andy Dalton the starter at that point in time, is because they knew he couldn't play. And guess what? When he got in there, he showed us all he wasn't ready to play.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's more to it than that as well. What you're saying is absolutely true. I think there's an extra layer to it. I think part of the reason why you want to name a starter early on is you want your team to have an idea. You want your team to be able to look at every single day and know that's my quarterback. There's actual value to that. There's value in training camp, the team coming in and knowing, hey, that's our quarterback. Whether it's a great quarterback or not, Jake Matthews, Drake London, Kyle Pitts, guys coming in and saying, hey, that's QB1, and QB1 is Marcus Mariota, and allowing the young guy to kind of learn on the fly. That it takes the pressure, in my opinion, off of the quarterback, and you kind of say, hey, we don't need you to get baptized right now, right? Like, we don't need you ready week 1. If you're ready week 4, great. If you're ready week 5, great. If Marcus Mariota gets hurt week 3, then you got to be ready to go. So I think that's the perfect situation to handle it when you're talking about a team that's already going to be irrelevant, right? Like, to me, it'd be a little different, and it may expedite the process for Desmond Ritter if the Falcons were a really well team and they were a good team and a talented team around him, right? Like, if we were sitting here, we're going, man, this is a quarterback away from being maybe a division winner or a playoff team. Then you really are kind of chomping at the bit to get this kid ready. But that's not the case here, so why rush it?
Sure. He is Hutson Mason. You can hear him every morning on the Locker Room on 680 The Fan. Of course, once football gets here, you'll see him all over the ESPN family of networks calling college football games as one of my favorite analysts. And of course, my analyst in of all your analysts, I just, you could tell people that I'm your favorite play-by-play guy because, when all else fails and the broadcast is going off, I'll just ask, what are you doing tonight? And that's exactly
you and my wife. There's only 2 people that tell me I'm their favorite analyst. So
you are my favorite analyst, and I love you. Hutson Mason, thanks for the time as always, brother. We appreciate it. Again, 680 The Fan. Make sure you listen to everybody in the locker. We'll talk to you soon, buddy.
I got to go to bed. I got to get up in 5 hours for morning radio.
All right, man. He keeps early hours, to say the least. All right, we'll be back. What are you guys doing for the holidays? Thanksgiving, Christmas, watching football, but is it going to be worth it? That's next right here on A to Z on Locked On Sports Atlanta, free on YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. Search Locked On Sports Atlanta.